We want to welcome everyone, and we want to welcome Dr. Michael Guillen.
Thank you, guys. Thanks again. Thank you. So, you know, if you go to Disneyland and you're about to enter a wild ride, they give you one last chance to exit, you know, before you go in. This is going to be a wild ride tonight. I'm just warning you right now. So if you're, had a long day at work and you're feeling a little faint, or maybe your mind is a little weary, you might want to just think about exiting. I hope you don't, but you've been warned, right? You've been warned. Anyway, I am really honored and humbled to be here. When Ron invited me to come, I said, absolutely yes. It's my favorite subject, science and faith. Coming to New York is like coming home for me, but for you guys to give up an hour and a half or so of your time tonight is just awesome for me. And all the time, every time I'm on television, I always tell my producers, let's make sure we give our audience their money's worth. I've always respected my audience. I've always hoped that whatever segment I was doing for whatever show, whether it was Good Morning America, Nightline, 2020, that the viewer would come away thinking, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. They'd learn at least one thing. So I'm hoping that you will at least learn one thing tonight. But let's get right into it because our time is limited. So I titled this talk, Truth, Proof, and Worldviews. And worldviews, your worldview is your impression of reality, right? It's based on the collection of things you've come to believe. In today's parlance is your truth. Your worldview is your truth. And of course, you're free to believe whatever you want. You can believe the moon is made of green cheese, but at some point along the line, your truth is going to shake hands with the truth. So if your truth self-identifies as a bird, you see yourself as a bird and capable of flying, I guarantee you, if you go to one of these skyscrapers at the very top and jump off, you're going to discover very quickly that your truth and your worldview is not valid. And so the question I want to ask you tonight is, and I don't know you, right? I don't know what your worldview is, but is your worldview valid? That is to say, how is it working out for you? How is your worldview working out for you? As it interacts with the real world, as it interacts with real truth, the truth. And I do believe in absolute truth, both as a scientist and as a Christian. That's a whole nother message. We don't have time tonight for that. So since I was in New York, I thought, this is a worldview. Remember that New Yorker cover? So for some New Yorkers, this is their worldview. It's, the Manhattan, Midtown looms in the foreground, and the rest of the world just kind of fades into the background, right? But I guarantee you that if you get on an airplane and you travel around as much as I have, I've been to the North Pole, the South Pole, I've been to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, and I'll tell you more about that. I've been everywhere. You'll soon discover that the world is a little bit bigger than New York City. It's a great city, and I love it. But this is not a valid worldview. This is a conceited worldview. So what is the worldview of a Christian? So the worldview of a Christian is that a Christian believes that God, yes, number one, exists, and God entered this world as a baby for two reasons. Number one, to show us up close and personal how much he loves us. And number two, to show us that death is not a terminus, it's a transition from one life to another. As a scientist, it fascinates me to wonder what that transition is really like. I think of it as an ice cube. So if you apply heat to an ice cube, the ice cube slowly ages and dies, but it doesn't go away. The water just undergoes what we call a phase transition. It has a different state of, it's a different state of matter. It goes from a solid to a liquid, but it doesn't disappear. So I imagine in my scientific brain, I'm imagining that that's kind of what Christianity is talking about, that when we die, we undergo some kind of phase transition from a kind of a physical state to a spiritual state. Again, that's purely speculation on my part, but it's, I think, a reasonable speculation. Now, these truths that Christians believe in have to be taken based on evidence and faith. Again, guys, I can do an entire evening on faith. I think we throw this word around and you really don't understand it. I'm actually, a book I'm working on right now. I just finished a Christmas novel, which I'm really excited because I love Christmas and it's great. It's a romantic comedy between a math teacher, a very smart, attractive female math teacher, and this kind of eccentric, kind of like me, high school science teacher. But it has to do with Christmas and all that. But I'm working on a book about faith from the point of view of science. So I'm really getting interested in this. So, but I'm just going to simply say that, so the Christian worldview is based on truths they believe, based on evidence and faith. But there is no proof. But that's not unusual, because Christians also believe that there are certain truths, many truths, that simply cannot be proven. Okay, that's another thing that Christians believe. And I use the shorthand there, the truth is bigger than proof. Just the way wisdom is bigger than book learning. There's a whole lot more to wisdom than what you learn in a book. So there's a whole lot more to truth than what you can prove. So that's the Christian worldview in a nutshell, okay? Now, obviously, not everyone goes along with the Christian worldview. Meet Bertrand Russell. He was, in his day, the Richard Dawkins of, he's really kind of very prominent atheist, brilliant mathematician, especially specialized in mathematical logic. He was a Welshman. And Bertrand, he had a little problem with Christianity. And he went through the trouble of letting you know that he was not a Christian. He didn't bother to tell you why he wasn't a vegetarian, or why he wasn't a Hindu, or why he wasn't a Buddhist, or why he wasn't Jewish, but he really took the time and trouble to let you know why he was not a Christian. So he had a problem with it, and this is one of his quotes, kind of give you an idea. The Christian religion, as organized in its churches, has been and still is the principal enemy of moral progress in the world. So that was Bertrand. He had it against Christianity, but he didn't have it just against Christianity. He had it against this whole notion of faith. He didn't like it. So he said here, we may define faith as the firm belief in something for which there is no evidence. Where there is evidence, no one speaks of faith. We're going to revisit that quote because it's not only wrong, but it's doubly wrong. And I'll explain to you why. You'll understand yourself why once we get through this wild ride together, okay? But just remember that quote. So Bertrand Russell did not go along with the Christian worldview. He had an atheist worldview. And for him, the atheist worldview, truth was not, I'm seeing that there's a little lag on this, huh, Jamal? There's a little lag on this when I push the button, but that's okay. I won't hold it against you. Because Ron said I was a really nice guy and I have to, okay, no, just kidding. So in the atheist worldview, truth is not bigger than proof. Truth is equal to only those things you can prove. If you can't prove it, it's not truth. You follow? There's a big difference there. And so for Bertrand Russell, that was his worldview. Hey, if you can't prove it, it ain't true. Don't be talking to me about faith and all that baloney. No. If you can't prove it, it's just not true, period. Okay, so if he had an encounter, let's say, with your average Christian, and the Christian says to him, but Bertrand, God exists. Bertrand's response would have been that. Oh yeah, prove it, pipsqueak. Because for him, you have to understand that's his worldview. If you're asserting that something is true, his natural reaction is, okay, fine, prove it. And then, of course, the average Christian will come back with a very articulate reply. You've been in a situation like that, right? You have a friend or maybe even a relative or somebody at work will challenge your faith. You open up to them and they'll say, oh yeah, prove it, prove it. This is the word, again, like faith that we just throw around. But tonight, we're going to have a little object lesson in that. So, which is it then? Is truth bigger than proof, or is truth equal to proof? That's the question we want to answer today. Okay? And once we're done answering with that, then we're done. And then you can ask questions, you can go home, you can buy books, whatever you want to do. I'm okay with it. So how do we answer this question? This is the all-important question that will distinguish between a Christian worldview and an atheist worldview. What we're going to do is the smartest thing to do. We're going to turn to the one area of human understanding that is the gold standard of proof. It is the one subject area, it's the one discipline where proof truly exists. What is it? It's mathematics. It's the queen of the sciences, math. You remember in school, right? Taking a geometry class. What did you have to do all the time in geometry class? Prove theorems. The Pythagorean theorem, the transversal theorems, all these theorems, that's what you did, you proved. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to look to math for an answer to this question, because math is the one and only discipline we know of where proof truly exists. So let's see. Let's begin at the beginning with Euclid. Euclid, by the way, you know, he was like Madonna. He only had one name. He wasn't, you know, it's like, he's not like Euclid Johnson or Euclid Smith. He was just like, hey man, I'm Euclid, okay? And truthfully, we don't even know if Euclid exists. That's a whole other story, but we are going to pretend like he exists tonight, and we believe that he lived right around in there. What's Euclid famous for? Geometry, plane geometry. There are other kinds of geometry, but plane geometry, basic, ordinary, garden variety geometry. Please, Euclid did not invent geometry. A lot of people say, well, Euclid, no, he didn't invent geometry. What he did, when he was alive, there were all these rules of thumb that had to do with geometry, which is the study of shapes, right? So if you were a farmer and you had like a triangular piece of land, there were rules of thumb for calculating the area, calculating the angles, the relationship of the angles, the relation between the angles and the area, and so for the perimeter. So he didn't invent it. What he did was he collected, like a songwriter might collect old songs or a sociologist might collect old songs. He collected all these existing geometrical truths or geometrical rules of thumb, like a puzzle, and then he organized them very nice and neatly. He found where each piece belonged, and the resulting whole, the resulting finished puzzle was what we call plane geometry. And I want you to notice this is a 100-piece puzzle, because that's going to become important in a minute. Okay, I want you to notice this is a relatively simple puzzle in the great scheme of things. You may have struggled in geometry, but in the great scheme of things, geometry is a fairly simple mathematics. So Euclid took all those geometrical truths and arranged them in a beautiful logical order, and the result is what we call Euclidean geometry. So, for example, look at these triangles. They probably give you the heebie-jeebies if you struggled in geometry. You're like, oh God, no, I don't want to revisit that. But whether a triangle is fat or skinny, symmetrical or asymmetrical, here's a Euclid theorem that's quite remarkable. If you add up the angles of each one of those triangles, so each triangle has 3 angles, if you add them all up, they always add up to the same number. What is it? 180 degrees. Doesn't that just blow you away? You would think that the fat triangles would be maybe, it would add up to maybe 200, and the skinny ones would add up to maybe 150. But this is a remarkable theorem. This is a truth. This is a remarkable truth. And guess what? You can prove it. You can not only assert that no matter what triangle you're dealing with, the interior angles of that triangle will always add up to 180 degrees. Remarkable truth, and I can prove it. So that was typical of what Euclid did. And in fact, to this day, Euclid's geometry is the #1 selling textbook in history. Second in print, in terms of print, second only to the Bible. That's how gargantuan his achievement was, this guy, okay? All right, now, here's where it starts getting really, really interesting. Meet Gottlob Frege. He's a German mathematician, philosopher. As you can see, 19th, 20th century guy. Frege had in mind that he wanted to be as famous as Euclid. He wanted to do for arithmetic, which is the study of numbers, what Euclid had done for geometry, which is the study of shapes. He thought, hey, if Euclid can do that for geometry, I can do that for arithmetic. I can take all the truths of arithmetic and I can organize them into a nice, beautiful whole where everything fits together logically, and I'll be just as famous as Euclid. Problem is, have you ever heard of this guy? Okay, so you that's a spoiler alert. Didn't quite work out well for good old Gottlob. Okay, so here's the story behind that. So you remember I said that geometry is like 100, or what does that say, 100-piece puzzle, right? Arithmetic, which is what Frege was tackling, was more like a 5,000-piece puzzle. Arithmetic is more complicated than geometry, it turns out. There are more truths in arithmetic than there are in geometry. So what I want you to understand is that this guy who had his sights set on becoming the Euclid of arithmetic, he had his work cut out for him because he was undertaking something far more complicated. In 1893, try that again. In 1893, how come it's not working? Nope. Okay, there it is. He published this, the Grundgesetze der Arithmetik, which is German for the basic laws of arithmetic, 1893. He foresaw his work to take up 2 volumes. This was volume 1. This is a big undertaking, 5,000-piece puzzle. And he was very proud of himself. He says, I'm on my way. And then in 1902, when the second volume was at the printers, ready to go, like he went to the local printers, this is volume 2, this is going to cement my fame. He got a letter from a very familiar person, you just got a glimpse of it, our old friend Bertrand Russell, in 1902. And this is what Bertrand Russell said to our friend Gottlob. He said, I've just finished reading your first volume, so it took him like 9 years. It was a complicated volume. He says, I've just finished reading your first volume very carefully, Grundgesetze der Arithmetik, and I found a problem with it. But Gottlob, it's not that there's no typos, it was all fantastic. No, the problem is not with you, the problem is with logic. And it has to do with set theory. It's a little complicated, but I can explain it to you this way. This is what Bertrand found wrong with volume 1 of Grundgesetze. This was the problem he found. You'll see it right away for yourself. Look at that. Read that statement to yourself. This statement is false. I have a question for you. Is that statement true or false? Ding, 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 ding. Houston, we've got a problem. Yeah. If this statement is true, then it's false. If it's false, then it's true. This is what we call a conundrum. And this is the kind of logical perversion that Bertrand found in the Grundgesetze. And of course, then that scuttled everything, because there's no way around this. There's no lawyer clever enough to overcome this loophole that Bertrand found in logic. This was cataclysmic, not only to Gottlob's undertaking, but to the whole effort to transform mathematical truths into a beautiful logical whole. It was a grand failure of logic. And this was Gottlob's reaction, as you can imagine. He said, your discovery of the contradiction has surprised me beyond words, and I should almost like to say, left me thunderstruck, because it has rocked the ground on which I meant to build arithmetic. It devastated him. And actually, he went on to publish the second volume because it was already at the printer, but at the last minute he added a little addendum where he explained, don't bother to read this, basically. And he was devastated and never really recovered it. For the rest of his life, he never really published much of anything. He died in obscurity. To this day, in retrospect, people try to give him kudos. Hey, I'll give you a gold star for trying, you know. But it's really a tragic story. But again, not just tragic for Gottlob. it was tragic for math. It's looked upon as a pivotal moment in math because of what Bertrand Russell had discovered. Okay, now, fast forward about 30 years and meet Kurt Gödel. Kurt Gödel was arguably the most famous logician in all of history, only maybe after Aristotle, who invented logic. And he was Austrian, and I have a little Austrian in me, so I feel like, hey, bro. And Gödel's story is more uplifting. So if you're feeling a little depressed over Gottloeb's story, get ready. Your spirits will be lifted. Because Kurt Gödel obviously was very interested in that whole drama that had just happened in the early part of the century. So here you are, 1931. He comes out with this book. Don't read that title. This is what it's known for. What he did is he published something in 1931. He published something called Gödel's Incompleteness theorem. Actually, there are two incompleteness theorems, but you didn't pay enough to hear about two of them. I'm just going to tell you the one, okay? Is that all right? All right. Next time, well, let's have a collection at the door, and then I'll tell him about the second. No, just kidding. The one I'm going to tell you about is really the most important. I mean, you have to listen carefully, because this is where the ride gets really wild, okay? And I will repeat it, but this is, if you've been sleeping, this is the moment to wake up, okay? Because this is the punchline. Here's what he found in just simple terms. He said, for any system of logic that is big enough to explain arithmetic or more, in other words, any system of logic that undertakes to put together a puzzle that has got 5,000 pieces or bigger, to use my analogy, right? Any such logical system that is self-consistent will always contain truths that it cannot prove to be true. Hence the word incompleteness. The system of logic is not complete enough to prove all the truths there are to prove. And so I got this little diagram. It's as if you're putting a puzzle together, like Euclid did for geometry and Gottloeb tried to do for arithmetic. And try as you will, you just cannot fit in some of the truths. Some truths will just not be provable. You can't prove them. They can't become part of the whole. They're just always going to be outliers, orphaned. I want you to let that sink in for a moment. The implications of that for us tonight are huge. Gödel's incompleteness theorem. So, in other words, right off the bat, one of the conclusions from that, one of the implications of Gödel's incompleteness theorem is that the world, according to mathematics, is that truth does not equal proof. That's right, right? There are truths you cannot prove. That's Gödel's incompleteness theorem. He proved it. He proved it. He used logic. Get this, this is mind-blowing. He used logic to prove logic's shortcoming. That is just brilliant. Seriously, brilliant. And so the world according to mathematics is that truth does not equal proof. The world according to mathematics is that truth is bigger than proof. Sound familiar? That's exactly consistent with the Christian worldview and completely inconsistent with the atheist worldview. So guess who was devastated this time? Yeah, there he is again. He just won't go away. You know, he just won't go away. But you have to understand, remember I showed you the slide where he said, I'm not a Christian? He published that in the 1920s, or like 1926. Then as he's getting older, in the 1950s, he's already retiring from math. He has already retired from math, in fact. This is 1950s, he's writing one of his memoirs. And this is one of the things he says. I wanted certainty in the kind of way in which people want religious faith. That was behind everything that he believed. This is a man who is striving for certainty. That's why he says, if you can't prove it, I'm not going to believe it. He goes on to say, I thought that certainty is more likely to be found in mathematics than elsewhere. That's why he was such a devoted and brilliant mathematician. But after some 20 years of very arduous toil, I came to the conclusion that there was nothing more that I could do in the way of making mathematical knowledge indubitable. He gave up. He surrendered. It's the white flag of one of the greatest atheists of the 20th century. Sad. His worldview was proven invalid. He loved his worldview, and he had every right to. It seemed like a reasonable worldview that if you can't prove it, it's not true. But his own beloved subject scuttled that worldview. There's almost a poetic tragedy to that. I mean, you can't write this stuff. If there are writers in the room, you can't write this stuff. You can't make it up. And so, what I want to do is go back. Remember I told you I was going to revisit that quote of his about faith? This man who hated faith. He disparaged faith. Faith for him, listen to it. Now look at it again. There are two parts to this quote. Let's look at the first sentence. We may define faith as the firm belief in something for which there is no evidence. Do you buy that? You shouldn't. What he's defining there is blind faith, but not faith in general. Look at the second sentence. Where there is evidence, no one speaks of faith. Let's see how we can correct that. I know we have a very dear friend of mine, Dorothy Vincent, who's here, and she's a brilliant editor. So let's edit Bertrand's quote. Let's take the liberty of editing the old boy's quote. This is really, this would make his quote a little more accurate. If he had said, we may define faith as the firm belief in something for which there is no proof, that's valid. Because where there's no proof, again, you depend on evidence and faith, right? Like the Christian worldview. And then look at the second part. Where there is proof, no one speaks of faith. When you make that tweak, that second sentence is still wrong. Let me give you an example. Let's go back to our Madonna. Our Madonna of mathematics. Remember I was telling you what a brilliant achievement it was? And it was. Because he was able to prove all the geometrical truths known to us, right? But that proof didn't come free. We had to assume things in order to execute those proofs. In fact, when you look at Euclidean geometry, he had 33 axioms, 33 assumptions that he began with. 22 of those 33 were definitions. These are 3 of those 22 definitions. The definition of a mathematical point. Listen to this. How did Euclid define a mathematical point? It's something that has no dimension. Has no width, no depth, no length. It's something, but it's nothing. It's not exactly your garden variety definition, is it? I mean, it's borders on the supernatural. Look at line. He said line has one dimension. It has length, but it has no depth and no height. Still, you can't. That's outside the realm of physical reality. You can find approximations to a point in a line, but you can't find those. Those reside somewhere out there. And same with the plane. It has length and width, but it has no height. But the point that I'm making here, apart from the fact that these definitions are rather supernatural-like, which I think is something you ought to contemplate, right? That you have to begin with something supernatural-like, and the result of believing those things is this grand thing we call Euclidean geometry. That's pretty remarkable. The point here is you don't get the proof without the assumptions. So proof depends on what? Faith. So Bertrand was wrong when he said where there is, whether you take where there is evidence, there's no one speaks of faith, or where there is proof, no one speaks of faith. He was wrong. Even where there is proof, you have to speak about faith. In other words, what when we look at Euclid through the lens of what Gödel discovered, this saying here that seeing is believing, and usually you get this from atheists or people who want to promote the impression of being skeptical. I'm skeptical. Prove it to me. Seeing is believing. Blah, 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 blah. Okay? But we now know, really, no. I'm proud of that. I'm proud of that move. It worked. What we now know is no. No. This is the real truth. Believing is seeing. If you're willing to believe Euclid's axioms, if you're willing to believe Euclid's 33 axioms, then you will see the results of it. You will be able to see the Pythagorean theorem. You will be able to see that all triangles have interior angles that add up to 100. But if you're not willing to believe those axioms, you don't get the reward of the proofs. No faith, no proof. It's simple as that. Believing is seeing. That is what's true. Seeing is believing is nonsense. So, I end with one final question. Remember that Gödel's incompleteness theorem says there will always be truths that don't fit into your logical system, that can't be proved. So I have a question for you. If we cannot access those outlying truths with logic, if we can't understand those truths, if we can't recognize those truths using logic, is there another way of accessing those truths? Can we find those unprovable truths? Is there a way to do it? If you ask a Christian in a Christian worldview, the answer is a resounding yes. The Christian will say, if you want to see those missing truths, then this is what you have to believe. Remember, believing is seeing. You've got to begin with a commitment to accept certain assumptions, certain things on faith, in order to see truths. You don't want to accept Euclid's axioms, you will never see the truths of geometry. And in a similar way, if you want to access these hidden truths, then the question is, what do you need to believe? Is there anything you can believe in that will guide you to seeing those extraneous truths, those great truths that are not provable? And John 3:16 tells us, yes, if you believe that Jesus is the Son of God, this is the Christian worldview, then what? Why would that act of faith, why would buying into that assumption, that axiom, if you will, because this is playing the role, this verse is playing the role of an axiom. If you believe this axiom, then you will get to see the truths that lie beyond proof. Why? Because remember what the Christian worldview further explains, that when you commit to this belief, then what is sent to you? Something called the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is also known as the helper. What is he going to help you for? What's he going to help? Lift a bucket of water? What's helper? What does that mean? And I've come to believe, given all of this that I've presented to you, among other things, the Holy Spirit is sent to you to help you see those truths that are not provable. Now look at another verse that confirms this. It's so beautiful. Why? Because when you commit to that belief that Jesus is the Son of God and you're sent the helper, it opens your eyes. The Spirit, the Holy Spirit, searches all things, even those things, even those truths that don't fit nicely, logically, into any logical system. Even the deep things of God. We're talking about deep things here, guys. We're not talking about 1 + 1 = 2. This question about God and our relationship to this God is something quite deep. And what I also find, especially with Bertrand Russell in mind, look at this verse. But people who aren't spiritual can't receive these truths. They can't see these truths. These truths lie beyond them because they can't be proved. It all sounds foolish to them, and they can't understand it. That was Bertrand Russell. He insisted that the only thing he was going to believe in, the only truths that he was going to believe in, were those that he could prove using logic. And if you take that position, then you're not equipped to see those truths that lie beyond the power of logic. That's Bertrand. And I'm sad for him. I'm going to end with a little story, because think about what we've discussed here tonight. Worldviews, truth, proof, and worldviews. This has been more than an academic discussion, I hope you understand. Because your impression of reality, your worldview, colors everything. It colors the way you see yourself, whether you see yourself as an accident or as a creation. It colors the way you treat other people, whether people just make you angry or whether you stop to realize, no, but they're God's creation too, and I have an obligation to them. It colors the way you see death. Is it the end for you or not? It colors the way you see God. It colors the way you see truth. It colors the way you see proof. It colors everything. It colors the way you're listening to me now. Your worldview is taking my words and my information, and it's processing through your impression of reality. And each one of you is unique. So your worldview is everything. And for me, it took on special meaning one day when I was assigned to do a story to go report from the Titanic. The Titanic lies at the bottom of the North Atlantic Ocean, and I went to Halifax, Canada, met up with a Russian ship, the Academic Keldysh. This is a Russian research ship. It has 2 3-man subs. There aren't many subs. Only France and Russia have subs that can withstand the pressure of going to the bottom of the Atlantic. So I had the privilege of going down. It takes about 2.5 hours. You spiral down. You're going down about 1 mile a minute. It's about 2.5 miles down. And you hit bottom, and there was the Titanic, as close as I am to Laurel. It was a very moving experience, as you can imagine. I was doing this for 2020. And I don't know if you realize, but when the Titanic sank, it broke into 2 pieces, and the bow went straight down, and then the stern did a somersault and landed on its back some ways away. So we approached the Titanic from the bow. We reconnoitered, we did some filming there, and then we went across what's called the debris field, because when it cracked open, all the stuff poured out. And this is where you see women's high heels. I remember seeing cases of champagne, unopened champagne, medicine cabinets, furniture, leather valises. It's just, this is when it really comes home to you what happened, the enormity of the tragedy. It's something I'll never forget. So we were heading towards the stern. And I remember 2 things. Number one, I remember seeing the propeller. When it somersaulted, the propeller was very prominent, pointing towards the bow. I remember looking at the propeller and thinking to myself, wow, that's really shiny. It's got this really kind of bronze, polished look to it. And then the second thing I thought is, we're approaching it really fast. Like, I would have thought he'd be slowing down as we're approaching the stern, but we were speeding up. And next thing I know, we collided with the stern, and things just started raining down. I was looking at everything with a small porthole. I was lying on my stomach. And soon I realized we were stuck, because I could tell that my pilot, Victor, he was a former Russian MiG pilot, was trying to get us out. He was just like, if your car gets stuck in the mud, you go forward, you go back, forward, back, and I could feel it, even though it was pitch black down there. And my diving buddy was Brian Cook. He's a screenwriter from Britain. And I was concerned he was going to panic and go for the hatch and open it up. So I repositioned myself on the couch on my stomach with 1 foot down here, ready to gang tackle him if he would dare go. Because we had been told ahead of time, warned, that when you're in a situation like that, your instinct, you lose, you don't become rational. And your instinct is, oh, I got to get out of here. And then you're really toast. So this went on for almost an hour. And during that time, and this is what I need you to understand, during that time, this is what I thought. This is the thought that came into my mind. I thought, this is how it's going to end for me. And I had been on assignment all over the world. I'd done stories in some pretty perilous places, covered wars and everything. But this, I thought, that was the phrase, this is how it's going to end for you. as I started doing calculations about how much oxygen we had left and so forth and so on. And then the next thing I thought about was, I thought of Laurel. And little did I know that up top they realized our predicament, and they phoned New York, ABC in New York, and then they called Laurel and told them what was happening, and we were probably not going to make it up. And my producer, Freddie Dorn, was up there and obviously very upset. But what I want you to, the reason I'm telling you this is because what I find amazing as I look back on that experience, and we finally, after about an hour, he got us free. And then he said, do you want to still look around? I said, no, let's just go back up. Because I knew it was going to take 2.5 hours to still go. I just, no, we've seen enough of the Titanic. Let's just get out of here. But when I look back on that story, what amazed me is how calm I was. I could easily have panicked, and I didn't. I had a certain peace about it. Why? Because of my worldview. I realized that death wasn't as sad as it was for me, that I'd never see Laurel again and all this. I knew that death wasn't the end of everything. And so that helped provide me with a supernatural, really a supernatural calmness. So what I want to say to you tonight in closing is this. Sooner or later, you're going to have your own Titanic moment. Maybe you already have. Maybe you're going through it right now. You're going to find yourself in a situation where there is no apparent way to escape. And you're smart and you're well educated, but you just can't see a way out of your predicament. How is your worldview going to handle that? How are you going to react to that? That's why this discussion we've had tonight, guys, is so important. This goes beyond math and intellectual discussions and stuff. It's deep, I know, but in the end, it's really quite simple. You have a worldview. It's unique. It's yours. It's your truth. But how valid is it? And in a pinch, how much good is it to you? Are you going to just fall apart when things go bad? Are you going to realize there are truths out there that we can't prove, but truths that give you a deeper, deeper, deeper look into life and death and truth and God. Thank you very much.